your idea is good enough right now to get funded. Finally, we'll talk about implementation strategy, and I'm a firm believer that you have to have an intuitive understanding of AI in order to get started. So we're going to talk about some data gathering techniques as well. So what is AI? I think Philip Kurt has defined it best in the context of business, and I encourage everyone to watch his TED Talk. In contrast to how we normally perceive computers as these amazing logic machines, AI aims to be an intuition machine. Now, let me unpack that a little bit. When humans create intuition, it learns from experience, right? Similarly, AI requires a constant source of fresh data and some indication of how it's doing at solving a problem. And at its core, it's pretty simple and requires a huge amount of processing power. But what's really interesting about AI is that it's constantly getting better, both in terms of intuition and in terms of the technologies that surround it. For example, vision and language skills. It would be naive to think that AI will intelligently solve all your business needs automatically. For this to happen, you need to have an intuitive understanding of what AI can and can't do, and that business questions you should solve with the AI. AI is not at a stage yet where I can tell you that, unfortunately. So if you're interested in deploying AI in your business, you first need to get an intuitive understanding of AI. I can't make this happen in an hour because I'll be providing you with an overview, but there are a lot of great resources out there, and here are some links. I really recommend Andrew's Deep Learning Guide as well, and also the kind of king of all AI learning books by Ian Goodfellow. And I'll share my slides with you so that you can click on these links. So AI has been growing exponentially in the past few decades, right? And it's been mainly driven by three factors. First is a huge increase in processing power that's largely attributable to nerds, right? They're just gamers who want faster GPUs. The second is a massive increase in data that's been driven by the rise of internet, social media, and smartphones. Oh, crap. And third is a decreasing cost of storage of data. And this has led to a huge increase in the number of AI startups. And a disproportion of them are actually being funded. So does that mean you just stop what you're doing and add AI into your business to get a lot of money? Well, the answer is no. I think that most startups don't actually need AI. If you have a look at the journey of a startup, normally they think of an idea, right? The ideation stage. They plan it out for the X number of months. Then they fully commit to it, and they build a product. They market test it, they scale it, and maybe they'll try and turn it into a monopoly, right? So initially, you would just be building a product here, be testing market appetite, and if you're good with business, you'll probably employ some of the typical MBA frameworks that they teach you in every good MBA school in order to grow your company, scale it up, and to make it really established. But all of this stuff really rely on old-fashioned statistical analysis of key business metrics that you're tracking. And for those of you who don't have the time to do an MBA, I highly recommend the 10-day MBA course it's a book by Steven Silbiger. So from the face of it, it doesn't really seem like you need AI at all. So where does AI actually fit in here? Well, I'd argue that you can have AI at the start because you're building an AI company, or you can have AI during the scaling phase because you want to beat competition and get as much market share as possible. And we'll address both these points in this webinar. So let's say that you're building an AI company, right? The first thing you need to know are the different types of AI companies out there and who your competitors are. Generally, AI companies are broken down to horizontal AI companies and vertical ones. Horizontal AI projects are solving one general problem that has multiple uses in many industries. For example, in this particular case is natural language processing. Vertical AI projects address a single type of customer and their needs, and they can move very fast away from the competition. So some of these things, for example, Textio, let me just see if this thing plays. This thing here isn't really general AI, right? It basically just addresses a very specific business case, which is you just type in some bullet points and it completes a whole sentence for you, right? This is really useful because, large companies like Google, they don't really have the time or energy to address every single one of these use cases. They much prefer just to build something that just recognizes your voice and turns into text, and to make that as good as possible. And also Google, companies like Google, they can hire all the rock stars, right? So competitive disadvantage if you try to build horizontal AI. So that means if you are going to create an AI startup, it's best to create a product that can go after a very specific use case. And additionally, big companies also focus on B2C solutions. So ideally, you should be creating a vertical product that serves enterprise solutions to give you the best chance of avoiding competition. Of course, if you're going to create an AI startup, you need to get investment to make these ideas come to life. Right now, I'm working for a family office to invest in AI startups, and there are definite trends for the most promising AI startups. And they tend to fall within like 4 categories. So this is just a general framework that I've been using to figure out whether an AI project is generally fundable. So these 4 general trends are AI that democratizes access to the mass market. I'll explain what all of this stuff actually means, for example, later on. AI that automates, AI that solves a distinct labor shortage, and AI that augments human potential. First, AI that democratizes. These are AI companies that allow the general public to access products and services that was previously available to the super rich in each market. Obviously, the most famous example of this is Uber, right? And how through the AI they're able to offer private driver services to everyone, and not just to the wealthy. Another example is Deep Sentinel, and they offer home security for image processing, but it's then funneled into human action. The second group are AI that automates a particular process that would have required a human being. It's up to you to come up with the ideas, but the examples are here. Automation Everywhere offer enterprise solutions for software automation. Rasa, who offer customer services through contextual learning, and Subtle Medical, who offer radiology diagnosis using AI. The third trend is basically a subset of the second trend of automation. And these are particularly fundable because they address an immediate need because of sharp declines in labor. For example, it's well known that the elderly care workforce is going to fall off a cliff because no one wants to do jobs, but we still need food and machines and care for the elderly. One example I'll touch upon is FarmWise, where they've automated weeding through AI. And this double whammy proposition is particularly attractive for investors. So definitely try and get into this space if you can. And finally, there are AI companies that aim to expand the human potential. This broadly means that the AI can do something that the human can't. In the previous example, humans can do customer service or pick out weeds, but these AI machines help to augment the human potential by doing things that humans simply can't, such as diagnosing a very complex cancer or designing a very complex drug discovery pipeline. And some of these examples I've listed just so you get a better sense of what I'm talking about. Verge uses AI to find drug targets with the help of scientists. Netramark is something I'm thinking about investing in, and it uses quantum AI to identify key clusters of biological markers that humans would never spot. And Arabesque uses AI to determine sustainability of particular investment. So on the other end of the spectrum, if you've already built a great startup, then you're in the scaling up phase, right? And AI can definitely help beat competition. But it's important for you to determine whether it makes sense for your company to invest in it before you start. A framework that I particularly like, and I'd like to simplify for you a little bit so that it becomes immediately actionable, is this framework right here. It's made by BCG. So for the purposes of this presentation, I'll address the first thing you should do if you're thinking about using AI to scale your company. If you just ignore everything else on the slide, you can't even see my mouse, this is terrible. If you just ignore everything on the slide, the first thing you need to do as a business is to prioritize your use case of AI. So if you just have a look at the middle of the screen, you'll see this prioritization matrix, right? The axes here represent value and speed. Now, value is the potential return over how much implementation is going to cost you. And speed is obviously how fast you can get it done. To start adding data points to this graph, you need to think about your customer needs. Things that affect the value and speed of the data points are technological advances now and in the future, as well as data sources that you could have now or could get. And after you've plotted this out, you're now in a position to decide whether you need to scale your company. Everything in the right corner, the top right corner, are the highest priorities, and you have to decide whether the time and money could be better spent elsewhere. And assuming that the answer is yes, I recommend hearing what Greg has to say afterwards. But before you invest any more time scrutinizing this framework, the first thing you need to do is to prioritize your use cases. Finally, I think the best way to get started in AI is just to play around with the data. And there's a bunch of great resources out there, and I encourage everyone to check it out. There are public data sets on GitHub. It's got an amazing list. UC Irvine also has a really, really good one as well. If you have a bunch of data that you want annotated, I recommend Mechanical Turk. That's provided by Amazon. So this is when you have a bunch of dirty data that you need to annotate and put some tags on. You can actually get this done pretty cheap by just outsourcing it on Mechanical Turk. There are data exchanges around, so you can start building an empire if you just share your data with someone else, and you can eventually get all the data yourself. And finally, scraping is always an option. So, sorry, this has been a really short talk, but I completely mistimed it. So just to really quickly summarize my talk, before you start doing anything in AI and whether you want to figure out whether you should add AI into your pipeline to scale your business, you need to get an intuitive understanding of AI. And there are lots of great learning tools out there. You really shouldn't be using AI. You can get away with just very simple analytics that's taught in the standard MBA class, right? They all rely on methods and they've been used for literally decades. So you should only really use AI if these things are insufficient or you feel as if you need to get the competitive edge. Don't use AI unless you're building an AI company at the start or towards the end if you're scaling the company, and only after you're cash flow positive. Because if you're going to implement AI somewhere in the middle, it's going to completely destroy that company. If you're building an AI company, try and go for vertical and follow the current funding trends that I've just told you about. And if you're scaling up a company, make sure you follow the frameworks to understand the cost and returns. And the best way to do this is to play around with data, right? There's a lot of free data out there, and there's people like Greg that you can talk to before you make that commitment. And with that, I'd like to thank Neoteric for having me here. And sorry it's been so short. And if you have any questions, you can always contact me on email. I normally respond within 48 hours. Right now I'm going through like a really busy stage, and I kind of missed my flight to Canada. So I'm trying to make up for everything here. So apologies if this was a little bit rushed. Hello?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. So, in your opinion, what would be the very first step to get started once the company is up and running, and you already have some data?
Sorry, can you just repeat the question? It's a little bit noisy. I don't know why.
Assuming we follow your steps, so you start the company knowing very well the domain and vertical, and get an intuition what the AI or machine learning in this case could do for you. What would be, in your opinion, the first steps to get started? I mean, I'm the guy that
the first steps to get started.
Yeah, I have a bunch of data and would like to automate the decision making, or simply make those decisions much better.
Yeah. Sorry, I think I must have missed it here. I don't know if you guys can still see my screen.
I know I can.
But yeah, great, fantastic. So that's a really great question. And assuming that you, Greg, have built this fantastic company, right? And everything is ready and you're scaling up, the first thing you really want to do is not just have a look at how much data you have, because it's kind of pointless if you can't predict your customer needs and how valuable it actually is, right? The first thing you want to do is to follow the framework pretty carefully. You have value on one hand and you have speed on the other hand of implementation, right? And there should be like a third axis, which is feasibility, but this is obviously assuming that everything you have, all the data we have, is completely feasible. You have to then prioritize what your customers actually want, right? Do your customers want a better customer service? Do you get a lot of complaints on that? If you have a look at your feedback, your 3 to 4 star feedback, what do the customers actually want? And therefore, you can start plotting these data points, right? If they want faster customer service, for example, right, it could be very high value because it would increase retention rate, and the speed of implementation is pretty easy as well because it's like there's a lot of white label stuff available. So it will probably sit somewhere here, right? So after you build out this matrix, you then here, which will then tell you which ones to prioritize. Obviously, the next step of that is to figure out how much it's really going to cost. Can you really afford it? Is the money that is spent elsewhere? And do you build it yourself, or do you just buy off a shelf? Or do you commission someone like you guys to help build it for them?
Okay. So, and you're telling us that you need to measure the thing that you're actually delivering to the customers. How would you build the feedback loop? Because getting the model and getting good predictions or recommendation, that's one thing, and properly using them, that's like another set of challenges.
Sorry, I'm struggling to understand. So you're saying, are you saying with a lot of interdependencies within this framework?
The dependencies are one thing. So you get a model. I don't know. What worked well in our case was the churn prediction. But how do you then decide first thing what to do with this churn prediction, and then how to build a feedback loop to your model to know whether the recommendations and predictions from the model are actually correct.
Yeah,
and whether
absolutely.
they're really helping the people that asked for those predictions in the first place.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So with this, you can just use things like Hotjar, right, which is immediately white labeled. You can basically have a look and inspect your customer interaction with your website. You can also have a look at, very basic things like Google Analytics to see whether they're retaining more, whether they're actually generally satisfied. You can have an upvote, downvote, and that will basically provide you with critical information that you need, whether your solution using AI is actually working or not. Now, assuming that it is working, that's great news. Assuming that it's not working, then obviously some refinements have to be made. And this is probably where like a pilot test will probably come in handy before you, alienate a lot of your customers with a crappy AI system.
Right. And what would be the from your experience, those like really use really good use cases for AI implementation? You mentioned you should be really careful when you're starting. That obviously might take a lot of time and a lot of money if you're not careful enough. So when you know that that's the case with either predictive analytics or recommendations.
Yeah, there are essentially two big factors that I see with AI that I think are particularly good, but in my experience, of course. But the first is marketing and customer retention, so customer services. Sorry, the two are marketing and also customer retention. So if you just have a look at customer care and customer services, a lot of the times they kind of reach a call center, and this stuff is extremely expensive. And if you're a very successful scale up, it normally takes a long time for you to actually get a response. The best use cases I've seen so far are companies who have just white labeled different customer care, use AI, and train for use their own kind of packaged answers. And that immediately increases the engagement of the customers because they feel as if they're being looked after. And then if that fails, they can then go for a hotline. I think that's actually like a very low cost, low barrier entry into the AI world if you're thinking about doing that. The other aspect that I found to be very effective is essentially marketing. Now, normally what happens in marketing is that you normally get a marketing manager. They somehow segment the people based on their interests in psychographics, etc. Like very, very basic stuff that's been taught in MBA schools. But a lot of times they get it wrong, right? And there are a lot of subtleties with trying to figure out who your target audience actually is. And this is something where using AI can actually really help. You can very precisely, based on all the information you have about your customer, and with databases, you can figure out precisely who your target audience actually is and target them faster. I've seen companies using this particular technique grow their target audience engagement by around 2 to 3-fold, which is really quite stunning.
Yeah, I always find it quite kind of funny that we know that computers cannot really be creative, that they are rediscovering what they do. But if we gather a lot of information about the people, they tend to understand us better than we actually do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think these kind of business decisions are mostly driven by human business intuitions, right? So, I don't know, you have men's underwear, for example, that you're trying to sell on online, right? So you think, okay, so the kind of people who are buying and they're maybe age between, I know, like 23 to 35 because they have a little bit of money, they graduated from college, so they're spending money. And then, this is just something that, humans like introspectively think about it. But with AI, it'll probably determine that most of the underwear buyers are actually female. And they're probably at a lower range, at a higher age group as well. So this kind of like mass analysis using AI on factors that a human being didn't really think about, but you have the data for, it becomes incredibly valuable for a business proposition.
Okay. Do we have any questions from the audience?
Greg, what's the best way for me to make the slides available to everyone?
I think it would be best if you could send them to Margot. Margot would redistribute them to everyone.
Great. Okay, so I got one. What are your thoughts about AI playing a role in customer experience to help lower the cost of contact centers and engaging visitors to increase sales for 2020? Well, like I said, I think AI is definitely going to play a huge role in terms of customer experience. If not by just purely interfacing for customers, also using personally identifiable information to figure out what they actually want, or what kind of noises you should be making to these customers to get them engaged, right? If you think about the normal conversion funnels of a customer, you first have to make sure they're aware of it, and then you have to make sure they're somehow interested in it, and you have to survive their evaluation phase after if they are in the market. And all of those things are not necessarily logical steps that a customer takes. They're more kind of emotional steps. And if you can tap into that using AI by having a look to see what their true interests are, not necessarily their declared interests, but what their true interests are, then you can get really, really far ahead using AI and acquiring customers.
Yeah.
And engage.
So let me add to that. We had a really good. Let me check how I can share my screen. So in our case, that was exactly the case with customer experience and point of contact. We were working with one of the biggest telecoms in Poland. They already are well over 1 million subscribers, uh, and needed something really good to start with channel prevention. So the way to go in here was to help them collect all the data they already had about their sales history, interactions in general. The sets of data you should be starting with is first the demographics that you can get, and if that's not exactly about your customers, you can either purchase or find some statistical information about uh, wealthiness of specific areas or zip codes. Then you get a purchase history and interest in the purchases. Every kind of communication, and that's both marketing and trainings your customers are trying. Problems they are experiencing, and with call centers, it's usually hard to reach them. So you might end up with not all the problems actually surfacing, and measuring where those people have problems, like with the hardware or with the devices they are using, that's available source of information. All of it together helps you determine which customers are then considering leaving the corporation. Once you know that, you then continue with recommendation engine to know what those people might be interested in, what would keep them engaged, what they're on the other hand interested in, whether they are so-called sleepers. And if you put all those information together and make it readily available for each contact of the call center of your call center army, uh, those calls are becoming much easier. The time there is much more efficient. And in our case, I think that was around well over 20% in churn reduction without any impact on revenue from customers. So, second question is the what precautions should be made when making an AI systems for medical treatment recommendation?
Yeah, that's a really tough question, to be honest, because it's probably the same kind of precautions that you make when having self-driving cars, for example, right? If an AI machine messes up, right, it's a lot easier to hate the machine for messing up. It is to hate a human being for a human error. So this is all just like bordering along the lines of like to what degree is it acceptable. So I think I heard some of the top AI guys discussing self-driving cars. They basically said that the self-driving cars would have to have something like a 10-fold less accident rate than a human driver in order for it to be widely adoptable. Because otherwise, the concept of having your life at the mercy of a machine is just far too scary for most people to stomach. I think that's probably true. And I think these precautions basically are that they just have to be tested and proven to be so, right? And in the same way that you enter a doctor's appointment room, you're basically signing this unspoken contract with the doctor, knowing that there's a case of error and the case of risk, and that you accept it, right? And therefore you receive medical recommendation based on that. I think the same thing can be said for AI as well. It's slightly different as well. I think it's probably going to be quite similar to self-driving cars. Yes.
I would add that medical treatment, actually, the first thing to consider is definitely HIPAA compliance. You have to be absolutely sure that it's used for medical treatment and medical treatment only. And second thing, it would, in my opinion, be a perfect case where AI is actually augmenting doctors instead of replacing them. It should be much easier to dig through all of the tests and procedures a patient has gone through and get valuable information from it and point the doctor to very specific things. And then it's the human interaction that majority of the patients wouldn't like to miss, and that's something that's also helping them.
No, absolutely. I really agree with you. I think, with everything that you said, it really rings true. I think AI will one day help augment the potential of doctors. Let's say that they'll go through the entire medical history of the patient. They'll probably look for different symptoms that are idiosyncratic as well, that doctors might probably miss as well. They'll be able to ask very smart questions and look for further recommendations for tests in case some things are flagging against certain rare diseases. I think all of those things are definitely true. And I definitely think that the first step for medical AI is to collaborate with doctors. I think this patient might have these things, and then doctors therefore be the ones to break the news and run further tests as well. But in saying that, I also agree with you in that doctors need to be present in some capacity in order to reassure patients. But I don't think the future will necessarily look like that. I think there will come a day where doctors aren't necessarily needed, but the human interaction is still needed. There will come a day where AI will be just vastly superior to a doctor, even the best doctors from the best medical schools around the world, because they simply can't hold that much information in their head. They're not able to keep up with the latest research, medical research. So in that particular case, I think you'll probably have someone that is kind of like a doctor that has some medical background, but the selection is therefore going to be who has the best bedside manner, who do you like talking to about your problems more, and then that doctor would, the so-called the pathology of the patient.
Thank you. Couldn't agree more.
Sorry.
I was breaking up a bit. I'd say I couldn't agree more. It would be fun to have a supercomputer behind your back and feel a bit like an Iron Man.
Yeah, exactly. But I think in general, there are just simply two areas that you can implement AI as a startup. The first is, you're actually building an AI startup. And, what I've said in the presentation is that there are definitely trends in which you could actually exploit in order to get funding and to help frame your design for the startup. The other one is to scale up your business with AI. And that's complicated. It's really on case by case situation, and what the kind of situation that you're solving as a scale up anyway, what other customer needs anyway, and then just helping yourself to plot them on a scale to see whether AI makes sense. And as soon as it does make sense, then definitely talk to Neoteric, right? And get that stuff built.
Yeah, we're here to help.
Petrochemical industries. To be honest, I don't know much about petrochemical industries. I'm actually, the family office I'm working in right now is involved with clean energy solutions. So I'm not particularly familiar with petrochemical industries. I think in terms of a power plant itself, I mean, this has been so true for most of the stuff with the rise of AI. So they can broadly increase efficiency by moving different processes together, closer together, and helping to plan out logistics in a much more efficient way. So I think the same thing is probably going to be true for petrochemical industries. In terms of a reaction itself, that is trying to generate energy from petrol, I think all of that stuff is probably fairly well optimized in terms of the broad chemical reaction. I think the scope for improvement there is probably going to be fairly minute. I think the limitations there is basically just chemistry.
With petrochemical industry, one thing that's actually becoming pretty common, that's the technical malfunction of devices, and that's already a big thing in manufacturing in general. Second thing is where for how much and when you buy resources. We've done something similar for steel trading, and predicting that when you buy oil from this specific location and in this specific amount, that would mean you would have enough of the oil in half a year for a much better price than you would buy it from other region in the world. And handling the logistics in here and the resources you need and where and how you buy the resources for your work, that's something that's definitely happening.
I think Simon asked which field of AI is outperforming today. So if I can just draw your attention back to the slides that probably everyone missed because it was so short and some people were locked out of it. Like I said, I've broken down the AI field into 4 distinct trends. The things that are basically failing are people who are just using AI because it sounds sexy. And if you take away AI, the whole business model doesn't make sense. So the ones that do kind of get funded a lot are AI that gives you access to services that you wouldn't normally get. So obviously, like I said, Uber is the classical example where everyone gets a personal driver. The whole thing is just driven by AI that assign drivers to you based on convenience. And AI that the one that is especially outperforming are AI that solves labor shortages. So this is good because it first automates a particular process that you would otherwise require a human to do. And second of all, there's just a huge amount of need for it. So like I said in my examples, farming, for example, is one of those things. No one really wants to become a farmer. It's actually a real pain to bend down and pick strawberries. So in order for you to actually figure out what a strawberry is and pick it and build a robot that relies on AI, it's actually a pretty big deal. Because we're all going to eat strawberries 20 years from now, but no one's going to be there to pick it. So there's a definite, distinct shortage in the labor force that you're addressing with the AI, along with automating something that shouldn't have required a human in 2020.
Well, I think we should definitely, to the list you're mentioning, we should definitely add the recommendation thing. I still remember the days before Netflix, where it would take me 4 hours to decide with my wife what to watch, and now it's so much better.
That's true. That's really true. But you have to be careful with that, right? Recommendation engines are surprisingly general, and it's seen as a horizontal approach. So if you were just to build recommendation engines, you probably wouldn't be able to outcompete the likes of Netflix. But it has to be something like very, very specific.
I doubt it would be possible to build a recommendation of everything to everyone. If you specialize, that's something that sites we are already using.
No, exactly. I mean, Facebook and Instagram are the ultimate recommendation engines, right? They're like particularly powerful because not only can they recommend to you what you want, but they also rely on your friends as well. So where AI is coming short, it's also using the power of your friends to actually recommend stuff to you as well, and then seeing what the return of that is. So it's extremely powerful. I mean, if in all honesty, if I were to started a brand new startup using AI, I probably wouldn't want to step on Netflix or Instagram or Facebook's toes.
Let's see if we have any other questions.
I think we're out of are there other questions? What's my take on computer vision? Is it useful in solving problems? I mean, that's that's such a general question. I mean, okay, so back in the day when I was a neuroscientist, we used computer vision to solve a lot of problems because it was one of these like very trendy, sexy emerging fields, and we used computer vision to determine how an animal behaves, and we mapped it out. So it's actually incredibly useful as a way to generate a lot of data for us as scientists. I think that's becoming more widespread in the scientific community. But in terms of business, in terms of enterprise solutions as well, I think computer vision is like one of the main strengths of AI right now that is constantly evolving natural language processing, computer vision, to make AI a lot more uh, general as for application than ever was before. If AI was only good at looking at just numbers, then it would be kind of useful, but it wouldn't be as useful, and you would definitely won't get the hype that you get at today. Right now, people are kind of worried that AI is going to take over the world and that super fast, super clever machines are going to enslave the human race. I don't think, without computer vision, that would be possible. So I definitely think computer vision is an incredibly important component of how AI is advancing today.
What about production lines? I think it's already it's also used in there to detect defects, right?
Yes, yes, it is. Yeah, I mean, computer vision has like so many general applications, right? It's now almost becoming like extremely difficult to imagine use cases that don't include computer vision than it is where you exclude computer vision. I know, Greg. What's your take on computer vision?
So with computer vision, my kind of mission and dream is to combine it with learning more about people. So if you think about a small corner shop, the owner of the shop knows each and every one of his customers. Know that his neighbor is having a birthday, that another one is doing a renovation, and can keep giving them nice bonuses and then offers because they know each other and they come to his shop. It's extremely difficult to do something like this when you have 1 million customers a day instead of 100 in total. So when you know how your customers behave and that the guy approaching you is actually one of those customers, you can follow up with the interactions with those people so that they actually feel like they're in the corner shop. You know what's you have this history of interaction. You know what they like. You don't spam them with offers they don't need. And if there's nothing particular happening, you can simply just be nice and enjoy the company and build those whole systems in a way that they feel nice around you. And if there's something that they need, they well, since they've been coming to your to one of your stores or websites or whatever, they will feel appreciated that you have this relationship.
That's really interesting. I sometimes wonder whether brick and mortar institutions are still going to be around for over human innovation, kind of take away all these kind of shops and human interactions. I mean, it's definitely true that brick and mortars are on the decline right now, and how far that goes on to decline for is kind of anyone's guess.
And that's why I think there's the mixing the computer vision with the history of interactions would be important here. You don't have a person that you're visiting that you recognize and that you like, and there's usually I don't know, someone from security that's really nice when you come into the shop, and you will need some kind of personalization with those automated shops to like going there.
I feel another question is like, how can companies generally solve data science problems? What's the process in companies? I mean, I think this is such a general question again. It's hard to really answer without sounding a little bit too general. Greg, what's your take on this one?
We have a process for let's call them newbies in AI that are wondering how to get started. So the first thing in here is to know, like you said, what problem you're trying to solve, and the thing that when you're building a model, the fact that you want to introduce the AI into your company is not the problem you're solving. You want to reduce churn. You want to improve retention of your employees. There's a thing that has to change on the business side in your company. So you have this goal. Then you need to know what's the success criteria. Where what does it mean that the whole initiative turned out to be excellent? What results would mean it's terrible? What results would mean it's something in between? After that, for each of those activities, like improving churn, there's some, let's call it, information from the future that you need to predict, and that's like kind of a model that you want to build. In case of churn, that's the simple, which for me is the simplest example, is letting your employees know who's actually gonna churn, and later on what's the reason for this churning. After you know what's the success criteria and what we're predicting, you have to identify data. You have to identify data sources or information in general that might affect this future event. Then, when we have the data, we need to think a little bit about technical constraints and tools, whether it's going to run somewhere in the cloud with basically unlimited computing power, or it's a model that would work on very small and limited device, and you have to be careful how much how much storage the model would use, how much memory it would use, how much bandwidth, and similar stuff. After that, you take legal constraints into consideration, meaning the fact that you're a telecom and you have not transfer data of your employees does not necessarily mean that you can use it that you can use it for profiling. So once we got that done, we're at the stage where we know what we're trying to do. We know what model we're building. We know what data we have, what data we need, what the constraints for using this model are. And the last step would be working around experiences. So how that model would be used. Someone asked about the call center in here. So you would have to determine whether those people in call center would know why those people are churning, who's churning, how big the risk is, and then allow them to feed the information back into the model, whether that person is actually a churner, and improve the whole process. The feedback loop, when you have it built in there, would require some tuning on the model side. You would probably identify new data sources, and that means additional work on the model, and that would be an iterative process after the model is deployed. And once it's running for quite some time, then you would end up with storage problems, and that even if the storage is cheap, it would eventually become a significant cost. If you're tracking millions or billions of events a day, it would start to cost. So that means you introduce some kind of sampling to make the data smaller and only focus on with full data on the difficult parts. After that model is running some time, another problem comes in, and that means that your system would eventually get abused and need some tuning. An example of such case is that model would start to behave in specific way and give people some discount if it learns that they might be at risk of leaving. So people might pretend to be leaving just to get better discount. Another example of that case is much too heavy search engine optimization that Google is battling from time to time. And if your site does not have valuable information, and you're trying to push it as far up in Google, that's basically abusing their search engine. And after some time, you might end up learning that the problem you're trying to solve is not a problem anymore, and you should and there's something else to do. And the whole thing begins from the very beginning.
No, that's actually a really elegant solution to a very general question.
What's the evaluation criteria for models for organizations? Is there any difference in the role of managing a team of data scientists if we compare to other fields?
I'm not very good at answering this particular question. Greg, maybe you might advise here. To be honest, I mean, I only really work with developers that aren't necessarily data scientists. My experience of running over work with two teams are data scientists, and you probably have a lot more experience in this.
So, with the team of data scientists, I think the biggest challenge is finding the right people. If you're implementing AI, you're in a really, really tough spot because you not only need people that are excellent with data, you also need people that have a knack for business, and you need a person that would be able to tell you that there's a bunch of data in here that might be useful to solve this and this problem in that specific way. In a company that doesn't know how to work with the data, it's, I'd say, a mix of it's a bit like consultants and developers in the first way. Uh, so they'd like more difficult developers.
Mm.
But I think that the general rules still apply. First, give them an objective and a success they need they need to achieve. Don't tell them how to do it, and let them choose the tools that they need to have to solve the job. Measure what they do, and by meaning measure what they do, I mean measure the effects and make them accountable for the effects. Try recruiting the best people that you that you can afford on the market, and it's usually better to have one excellent person for a key role than to have five average people still have some way to go. With that approach, you have constant flow of talent. You have the people that appreciate the responsibility they are given and the freedom to how to solve those problems. And the work is very similar to building the standards of. And what about the evaluation criteria for models for organizations?
I'm not really quite sure what that actually means. What are the evaluation criteria for models for organizations? Is this, what does that actually mean? Are you talking about, if I'm an investor, what metrics do I evaluate an organization on? Saad, can you just clarify that question for me?
Yeah, let's give that just a sec. Let me try to anticipate a little bit for what we're being asked about in here. So evaluation criteria for models for organization. There's a bunch of metrics that tell you how well the model is predicting stuff, but that just means to an end. Eventually, you get some business metrics like revenue per customer, churn, number of new customers, retention of employees. That's the only metrics that you should really be care about. It might be a fancy. The artificial intelligence or predictive analysis. There's a bunch of fancy names, but in the end, those are tools for your employees or your customers to do some stuff, and it's either helping them or not.
Well, do you feel as if, if that is the right interpretation of the question, then using predictive analysis in order for structural organization for business, is that really something that's pervasive right now? Is it really widespread? I mean, in my kind of experience, even they don't necessarily use AI. Kind of in a lot of companies where the big corporates, the Fortune 500s, there may be a component of this kind of stuff. But normally, it's the structure which is fairly hierarchical. It pretty much automatically exposes gaps of workforce that you can then patch in for a recruitment drive. Where does AI really come in here?
Not What's the best way to stay updated in data science? So first of all, attend Margus webinars. They are really good. Take a look at the history of the webinars she has organized so far. Those are definitely good things to give you a bit of inspiration on what to do. And the second thing is to simply do stuff.
No, I completely agree. I think the third option I would definitely add is that there are just a lot of amazing seminars out there in the world. I mean, there are like conferences happening in all the major cities that I know of, and normally they're just free. There are all these webinars as well. YouTube, for example, normally retrospectively post these seminars out as well. So it's a really great way to stay updated in data science. And I think, if you're just talking about data science and to see, the different types of things that people are doing with data and just to get some inspiration, the best way to do that is just to listen to different pitches. So there's a lot of first-time founders there with like a crazy good idea and they decide to publish it. And you can just find them everywhere, all over YouTube. And if you just kind of like have these kind of meetups in your city, normally you'll find like hubs of people doing AI startups, and they're all like incredibly interesting. Obviously gravitate towards people who are the most interesting as well. It's like a very good technique. That's how we've been able to originate a lot of our funding opportunities. So, as a family office, we tend to invest in very good AI companies, and trying to find the best of them is actually a pretty tough job. And all that normally involves me doing is kind of traveling the world and just listening to different pitches from different AI startups and then just hand selecting them. But obviously, if you live in a particular city and you don't want to travel that far, there's a huge network effect amongst the AI community as well. Someone that you've just met who is working in a similar space would all give a very impressive speed. Exploiting that network effect is definitely a very good way to stay on top of the developments of data science.
Next one from Eliza. How can you educate companies, owners, product management, etc., to start implementing AI to solve their problems, or to communicate channel to use?
I think the first way to do it is just to have. This is again like quite a tough question. I mean, in order for you to actually educate the companies, you just have to educate the key people involved in actually implementing the big companies, right? If it is like a big company, like already AI, and they probably have initiative. If you're talking about SMEs, that's actually a little bit tougher as well. You need to have someone who's actually just deeply interested in AI and someone who has a very good intuitive understanding of what AI can bring to the table, and for them to just have a very clear voice. Now, I think a lot of the times, I don't think people have a very good intuition of what AI can actually do. And when they hear the term AI, they tend to get a little bit intimidated, which is why I wanted to say that AI is actually a fairly simple process. And it's just like raising a child. Although that's probably not very simple. But it's just, about supervising them and making sure they get to the right answers, and you provide them with opportunities to get to the right answers. But again, having that intuitive understanding of AI requires some level of interest and some bravery from someone within the company that has a voice. I don't know if initiatives and definitely attending seminars like this is probably very helpful to get yourself interested in AI.
And I usually work.
Greg, do you have anything to add to that?
I usually work with business executives, and their approach is either AI is some kind of black magic that can do anything, or it just glorifies statistics. And both of them should be told it's actually something something in between.
Yeah, I know exactly. But I mean, they're both true to some extent, right? But if either of those things are true, then you definitely need a black box that can do everything and anything, and you definitely need something that's better than statistics. So either way, you definitely should be interested in AI.
And getting the conversation the initial talk usually revolves around use cases we had with others and how machine learning has helped them to predict what they need. As for the channels and communication, I think webinars and inviting them to something similar like this, even if it's only for your own company, might be a good idea. Within the company, a hackathon is another thing to try. Those people think usually like they have a bunch of they have a lot of time of their employees. They can invest in some initiatives. Investing a day or two of couple of people and have something great in return, it's usually not that much of a risk. So if you can show them with something promising that doesn't require a huge investment of their time or the time of your colleagues, that's usually good way to go.
No, I agree. So how does AI collaborate with blockchain? It seems like, those two things are almost at odds with each other. I mean, I used to work at LiveTree as the COO. And LiveTree to become a blockchain and AI company at the same time. And we've kind of explored this theme quite a lot. It's actually super difficult, if you think about it, to actually get those two things to marry together. I mean, on the one hand, you have AI, which is probabilistic, and then you have blockchain, which is basically deterministic. And then you have AI, which is, always evolving and changing. And blockchain, which is, just permanent and it's locked up forever. You don't really get a chance to edit it. And then you have AI, which is, algorithms that basically guess at reality. And then you have blockchains, which is, they're just to record reality. So those two things don't seem to be very compatible. And we actually had a very tough time trying to figure out how those two things can work together. I think fundamentally our solution was that said it just to get a lot of investors because there's some two buzzwords happening at the time. So it was very disingenuous. But in terms of how they could work together, I mean, there's been various ideas of how you could secure your personal data on the blockchain, so that all that stuff could be secured in order to feed it into AI. And that way, not only do you protect your own data, you can also control how much money you get from having sovereignty over your data. And that model kind of shapes the way that is traditional, which is you basically surrender your data by signing obnoxious cookies or whatever, and then accepting it without any sort of real consent or notion that is happening. And then big companies like Netflix or all of FANGs are essentially making a lot of money from your personal data. Maybe the next solution is to essentially own your data, which will then be fed to AI machines. But the kind of logical step that's required for that to happen aren't exactly very obvious unless there's a real change in the way we actually perceive data, and that we actually get outraged by people actually taking our data without our permission. I don't think people care enough right now for that to happen, but it's definitely something that's coming towards that borderline where it's starting to trend. I don't know, Greg, what do you think about this?
So with AI and blockchain, that's like two completely different worlds for me, and it's more like a matter of your idea what to do with them. The one that we have discussed as something that would be great is to have AI become something like a model, something like models that companies use to understand what's going around them, but with the data of the people blockchain, and where you allow someone to access your profile or not, and where you revoke such permission. That seems like something good.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I still have this dream that one day we'll use blockchain for this giant data marketplace, and you get to surrender as little or as much information as possible as you want, and then it becomes a free market for your information, and then that would feed and create a kind of a centralized greatest AI the whole of humanity with their consent. Maybe that's the pipe. Maybe that's decades away. Anyway, Greg, I think it's probably time to call it a day on this webinar. It's been really fun having you here, and thank you very much for the opportunity.
My pleasure. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for your time. All right, take care, and hopefully everyone here had fun.
Thanks. Bye.
All right, bye.
Do you really think I give